In this video, we're going to be talking about the solar cycle. So our sun, because it's so hot and electrically charged, it is able to generate a magnetic field. So like Earth, the sun has a magnetic field around the poles. However, what happens is every 11 years, the North Pole turns to the South Pole and the South Pole turns to the North Pole. This cycle is called the solar cycle. And the process happens through an 11-year period. And in this 11-year period, we're able to see not only a correlation between the poles changing, but also a correlation between the sunspots that are being formed during the solar cycle. We have solar maximum and solar minimum. Solar minimum occurs when the magnetic field is just at the poles, but solar maximum is when it's at the equator. So what I'm trying to say is, it originally starts out here, but eventually the magnetic field turns. When it's at this point over here at the equator, it is known as a solar maximum. And that's because if we looked at the other video where we talked about the sun's flares, we had a brief statement of how sunspots were being formed. And the way they were able to be formed was because the magnetic pole got tangled, and when it got tangled, it released energy. That was a solar flare. But when it gets tangled and sinks in, it creates a sunspot. So we start out here, and in the equator, where it mainly tangles, we're able to see more solar flares and more sunspots being generated. But then again, it goes all the way back to the pole, and then we witness a solar minimum when there's literally none to almost zero solar flares and not a lot of sunspots. And that is because the poles, the magnetic field, are at the poles, and they're not exactly interfering with any of the other parts of the sun. And so because of that, we don't see much. Over the last 265 years, we have recorded only 24 solar cycles. So the 25th solar cycle actually started in 2020. And if you look at the cycle, we're actually in 2025, we're at the peak of this solar cycle, which is over here. So 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. So during this year, you can expect a lot of sunspots and a lot of solar flares happening because we're right now at the solar maximum of the solar cycle for the sun. So the solar cycle has many effects. For example, it can cause disturbances within satellites. Also, astronauts that are in space get affected by these solar flares. The sunspots don't really do anything, but it's mainly the solar flares that we're really worried about, because when they get released into outer space, they come towards us, and they can cause things like communication problems, they can also create lots of radiation and a lot of electrical grid disruption or cellular disruption. So if you want to send spacecrafts or other kinds of objects into space, we have to wait a couple years, because there's going to be a lot of solar flares happening during this period of time. And to avoid having any accidents with the solar flares, we have to wait until it's at a solar minimum, or if it's at a period of time where it doesn't have that much solar flares. And during that window, only then can we send it. One thing we witness the most during a solar maximum are auroras. These auroras happen when the solar waves hit the poles of the Earth. What happens is that the solar wave and the Earth's magnetic field come together and create the aurora that we know. So during a solar cycle at its maximum peak, we're able to see many auroras or many other things happening.